The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, The US Under Trump, a New Global Security Paradigm. Donald Trump's second term as president has shifted US security policy from liberal internationalism to a more transactional, interest-driven approach, emphasizing economic leverage and greater expectations of allies. Is this a temporary change, or does it mark a lasting transformation in global security and America's leadership role? Will US allies need to reconsider their reliance on Washington, and might adversaries feel emboldened to test the limits of American commitment? To explore these and related issues, join our live debate and share your questions and comments with our expert panel.
Welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley. This is a Democracy Forum debate where twice a month we discuss issues sometimes hidden in the global nooks and crannies, overlooked by mainstream media and commentariat, but not today. The Democracy Forum is asking the critical question of our times: the US under Trump, a new global security paradigm. Not long ago, we lived with the assumption that American military supremacy and international law, anchored in the concepts of Western democracy, would secure trade routes, grow wealth, and keep us safe. Today, those assumptions have been shredded. So what will unfold? Our brilliant Democracy Forum panel will tell us. Sharon Hudson-Dean, Dafydd Townley, Dr. Georg Loefflmann, Sergey Smolnikov, and Democracy Forum Chair Barry Gardner, MP, will listen to their predictions and arguments and sum up at the end. And before all that, I have the privilege of asking our President, Lord Charles Bruce, to give us the background and the canvas of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which will examine the foreign policy agenda of the second Trump administration and its consequences for global security. I'm grateful to the Democracy Forum for highlighting this important topic and for inviting such an eminent panel to participate today under the moderation of Humphrey Hawksley. I look forward greatly to hearing the presentations of each of our panelists and to the discussion that follows. Just over 8 months have passed since the White House published its national security strategy in early December last year. As Brookings reflected at the time, I quote, "Washington has far less confidence in the assumptions that underpinned United States foreign policy for decades, the indisputable benefits of alliances, the virtues of globalization, and America's role as an organizing power. And it needs to grapple with a geopolitical and domestic landscape defined by insecurity, rather than restore an earlier idea of American supremacy." But some 6 months earlier, however, the Washington correspondent Michael Shearer asked President Trump how he would define his core foreign policy agenda of restoring American supremacy, America first. I quote, "Well, considering that I'm the one that developed America first, and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one that decides that," said Trump. And thus, a new security paradigm has emerged. Transactional nationalism, where President Trump privileges commercial advantage, views military conflict as economically ruinous and contrary to a state's larger self-interest, and yet is unafraid of the limited application of US military force, says the Royal United Service Institute. And confronted by this new paradigm, many seasoned commentators regret the passing of a largely liberal rules-based world order, which the United States once upheld. As Fareed Zakaria predicted in 2019, the question now is whether, as American power wanes, the international system it sponsored, the rules, the norms and values, will survive. Or will America also watch the decline of its empire of ideas? And interviewed by Foreign Affairs last year, the historian Margaret Macmillan attempted to answer the question of why is America going it alone, by pointing to the extraordinary and overriding contradiction at the heart of President Trump's agenda, I quote, "The past offers plenty of examples of world powers falling out with erstwhile alliance partners or seeking new ones," she wrote. "But it's hard to think of a case in which the leader of a major alliance has so casually and brutally cast aside allies that for the most part have been dependable and have accepted its writ." And she concluded, I quote, "The striking lack of historical precedents for such behavior does not suggest a clever Machiavellian policy to enhance American power, but rather it shows a United States acting against its own interests in bewildering fashion, undermining one of the key sources of that power." Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions for the panel, please pass them through the chair.
Lord Bruce, thank you very much for that. Acting against its interests, the decline of its empire of ideas. Our first panelist is Sharon Hudson-Dean from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House, as it's more commonly known. She's worked in the top ranks of US diplomacy, serving as European Security Policy Director and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, working with NATO and Europe. She has also been Consul General in Sydney, Australia, with a depth of knowledge about China and security. So, Sharon Hudson-Dean, what is our new global security paradigm? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and discuss a few of these things. I left the State Department about 6 months ago, and as you noted, I'm now doing some analysis and think tank work. And so it's been very interesting and fun to dive into what the Trump administration is trying to achieve and coming at that from the outside. I'd like to talk about some broad descriptive elements of the Trump administration's changes and in policy and where we're headed on security. Give you maybe 3 main points to take away that we can add to the discussion, and very eager to hear what my fellow panelists have to say. First of all, I'd like to start out by saying that the new Trump administration policy is not a shift to isolationism, and it's not an aversion to being a powerful country. But what it is an aversion to being bound by reciprocal obligations. And so the Trump team is using and wants to continue to use leverage when it comes to asserting the fact that we have the world's largest economy, that the United States has, in effect, the world's most powerful military. And so using this as a dominant, unconstrained actor in order to achieve goals, and doing that unilaterally, transactionally, and revocably. This is coming from key policy leaders and thinkers in the administration. I would note that there is not universal agreement. There's definitely debate inside of the Trump administration, and I can outline that very quickly. There are what others have described as essentially 3 factions inside the administration. One, what we might call the prioritizers. This is led by Elbridge Colby. He is the policy lead in the Department of Defense. I would strongly urge anyone interested in learning more about this to listen to his most recent interview with the New York Times, which is on the New York Times podcast website, where he goes in depth. This is Colby goes in depth about why he thinks the way he thinks and where U.S. priorities are, in his opinion. So Colby prioritizes, in other words, what we need to focus on given a limited set of resources. And he focuses mostly on China and how do we no longer are they saying we're competing with China, but more how do we manage that relationship with China? And in other words, this is a triage, that there are a lot of demands on US attention, resources, security priorities, and that's where it should be. The second group, which you could say is led by J.D. Vance, the vice president, is sometimes called the restrainers, the restraining group. They want to pull back. They say we should not be trying, the United States should not be trying to run the world. And so there should be very limited engagements everywhere. And that is a line that gets a lot of support in the MAGA base. And then there's still a group of primacists who, meaning the US should be in the top position globally, we should be exerting our leadership, we should be spending more, et cetera. That group is still out there. There are definitely people in the US Congress that believe that on the Republican side. I would also highlight that on the economic side, the head of the President's Council of Economic Advisors is a man named Stephen Moran, and he has developed an economic policy that supports and matches the Colby policy of giving priority and using tools, both military and economic, in order to achieve US goals. He came up with a policy which is frequently called the Mar-a-Lago Accord in 2024. And it is a combination of using tariffs and security guarantee leverages in order to get US economic advantage, but also moving our partners in the direction we want them to go vis-a-vis our overall global policy. So with that background of what's happening in the Trump administration, or who some of the main players are, I'll highlight 3 points. One is this sense coming mostly from Elbridge Colby that the United States should exert power without having binding partnerships. He put this in the national security and national defense strategy that he released this year. It highlights homeland security first and a focus on the China relationship second. It dropped the strategic competitor language that had been in use in Trump 1 and in the Biden administration, and instead aims for a relationship with China that is stable and peaceful. And we've seen a variety of meetings take place in the last year. The president has met with President Xi, other meetings to push this forward, with also a heavy focus on economics. One of the other key elements in this national defense strategy is that it explicitly sets aside what Colby refers to as abstractions, like the rules-based international order. And so he explicitly rejects that the US should somehow have its power restricted or bound to a shared structure like the world, any sort of world power. Colby calls himself a flexible realist in this regard. He also has dismissed in public a collective middle power strategy. And I'm sure my fellow panelists will get into a little bit of that. We can do that later. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has been doing similar meetings and going out around the world. Rubio himself has engaged quite a bit with multilateral organizations. And so, again, this is not 100% across the administration that we are rejecting, that the United States is rejecting that. I would say that this is not a retreat from the world, but it is a refusal to be bound by some of these structures. Point number 2, economic statecraft as a deterrent. Definitely, this is being led by the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Again, here there have been internal fights within the Trump administration over who will lead this. Bessent has definitely come out on top as the lead strategist. We saw him at the NATO Ankara summit, which was interesting. That is not normally the type of place where a U.S. Secretary of the Treasury would go, but he did go there in part to finalize U.S. sanctions policy towards Russia. And so this is using tariffs not as a leverage. And so that tariffs is not just about the U.S. economy, although that is critical, but also tariffs are a way to get other goals. So, for instance, looking at what has happened with India, for example. And so in February of this year, the administration cut a deal with India to reduce tariffs from 50% to 18%. And this was conditioned on India stopping their purchases of oil from Russia and increasing purchases of US goods. And so it's using tariffs in multiple ways to get leverage. I would also note the US energy dominance strategy, which is, again, a combination of economics and security. Energy dominance with increasing our production, increasing our sales, becoming energy independent very strongly, developing nuclear, that is a new addition to the policy now, but also using American energy production to gain leverage over Russia, to be able to exert more power in the world. Am I hitting time, Humphrey?
You're close to time, but just wrap up for us. But it's been fascinating, yeah.
Third point that I wanted to make is that a lot of the declarations coming out of the administration have what I would call somewhat questionable timelines. They are announced as things that need to happen now, and yet they are things that take time. And so one very important example of this is our policy on critical minerals. China, as I know you've discussed here before, it dominates the critical mineral processing and increasingly critical mineral production. All of our new technology needs it. Our military technology, our day-to-day technology, electric vehicles, batteries, everything. We have a policy now to get critical mineral production going in the United States. We're putting rapid money into it. The president set a deadline for next year to get this up and going. This is not an easy process. Production is not fast. It is not easy to get going. And so here again, these timelines, there is doubt that we can substitute Chinese production as fast as needed. And so that creates some vulnerability. It creates a gap. I will just add one final point to all of this, that as the United States has repositioned itself very rapidly, as the Trump administration has moved out very rapidly on these points, the world is reacting. And so it has taken a little bit of time, but other countries are hedging. They are creating other strategies. We saw this at the NATO summit in Ankara. The Europeans are stepping up. This is long overdue. It is not a new policy of the United States to have our NATO allies spend more and take a lead. That is starting to happen. Again, there are some questions about how quickly and where will the gap be, but it is moving out, putting more money into that. And then other countries are also moving out in that way as well. And so in that sense, the reaction to US policy is definitely creating a new paradigm. And with that, I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much. Can I just, because you mentioned where J.D. Vance on the restrainers, does Secretary of State Rubio, Trump himself, or any of the key figures fit into one of those three categories you outlined?
I would say there's a regular debate inside the administration. This is my understanding in terms of what we read in the media regarding where U.S. policy should go and how to focus on things. Marco Rubio is now our national security advisor. He is in the White House all the time and an active member in these discussions as to where things should head. Ultimately, the president makes the final decision. And he has surrounded himself with these different groups and listens to each one to make a decision in that regard. And so in that sense, I would not put the president in one category. I would say that there's an active discussion going on, which happens in all administrations and White Houses in terms of bringing things to the table, considerations, et cetera. The America First policy is the dominant policy. That is the Trump policy, as Charles outlined before, Lord Bruce outlined. And so that is in many ways where the president will land. But as we've seen with the Iran war, it isn't always in sync with what we would expect. And it has generated a real pushback. That the Iran war in particular has a lot of people, including pundits on the MAGA side with a lot of followers, pushing back and saying, this is not in line with what the policy was. This is not what you were elected for.
Thank you very much. Stay with us. I think there will be pushback within or about what you say, because it's been fascinating. We are now going to Dr. Georg Loefflmann from Queen Mary University of London with a research focus on US foreign and security policy. His recent book is The Politics of Antagonism, and a previous work, American Grand Strategy under Obama, Greenland, Venezuela, Iran. How different is it from the Obama years, Georg Loefflmann, and where are we heading?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a really good question. What I would say is that there are some connections between Obama and Trump in sort of defining American grand strategy, but also significant differences. What essentially unified all American presidential administrations since the end of the Cold War, and that goes for both Democratic and Republican presidents, was the idea that the United States should pursue a strategy of liberal hegemony, that American military and economic power is sustaining a liberal international order of economic openness, of great power peace, of support for democracy and human rights. And that ultimately the United States represents something larger, something universal. This was also very much sort of framed in the idea of American exceptionalism, right? That the United States is the indispensable nation to maintain and lead the international order, in the words of Madeleine Albright, as Secretary of State under Bill Clinton. And Barack Obama very much continued on this bipartisan strategic consensus. He reaffirmed American exceptionalism, but under Obama, and as a result of the global financial crisis and of the setback and the strategic failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was also an assessment that the United States needs to conduct foreign policy and security policy differently. That these wars, these experiments in democracy export and nation building, they are too costly, and that there are significant domestic challenges in the United States, right? Public infrastructure, healthcare spending. So under Obama, we had a rhetoric of nation building at home, right? We cannot just, patrol the streets of Kabul. We also need to repair the streets of Detroit. Obama and his Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, they talked about the blob, this sort of unthinking mass of the US foreign policy establishment and the think tanks and the mainstream media organizations like the New Yorker, like the New York Times, that were always sort of clamoring for military solutions, military interventions. And Obama and Rhodes emphasized military restraint. Obama famously said that just because we have the biggest hammer doesn't mean that everything is a nail. And this dynamic of restraint, I would argue, is something that was very much then turbocharged under Trump, right? Trump came out vehemently against the US foreign policy establishment. He criticized them for a dismal track record of producing nothing but failure and losses in war. But here's the big difference, I think. Obama wanted to modify American hegemony or American liberal hegemony in order to make it sustainable, make it more cost-effective, less costly, still believing in this idea that America needs to set the agenda on everything from global counterterrorism campaigns to combating climate change to responding to pandemics and outbreaks like Ebola, for example. So it was very much an affirmation of American leadership. And the first and also the second Trump administration, this idea of America first, fundamentally rejects this notion that the United States needs to lead the international system, that the United States supports and guarantees a liberal international order. And I think what really separates Obama and Trump is that Trump rejected this linkage of American exceptionalism and American foreign policy and leadership of this international order. And America first and Trump's rhetoric and the rhetoric of many of the high-ranking members of the Trump administration, they draw from three paradigms, I would argue: nationalism, populism, and realism. America First is nationalist in the sense that Trump says the international system is not a order marked by cooperation. It is zero-sum. For the United States to win, for the United States to prosper, for the United States to advance, everybody else needs to lose. So the United States is in an existential competition with both traditional authoritarian adversaries like China and Russia, but also very much with long-standing democratic allies like Canada, like Germany. And we have seen this in the repeated barrage of retaliatory tariffs where Trump targets these long-standing allies. The second is populism. And what essentially Trump has said all the way back to 2015 when he announced his presidency was that foreign and security policy under all of my predecessors, be they Republican or Democratic, have let down the American people. They have resulted in American decline. They have devastated the nation through ruinous free trade policies that have shipped working class jobs overseas, through open borders that opened the floodgates to illegal immigrants, which in Trump's rhetoric are almost exclusively criminals and terrorists, and through ruinous military interventions that ended in failure. And Trump essentially says that America First is about restoring the security and prosperity and the safety of the American working class through restrictive immigration policies, through heightened border security, through economic protectionism, getting rid of all these free trade deals, or at the very least negotiating these free trade deals, and also very much reducing American security commitments abroad. And the third one is realism. And this is essentially the idea that the most important factors in the international system are not international norms and multilateralism and cooperation and the international community. It is national sovereignty that must be protected and defended at all costs. It is about a country's economic and, most important, its military power. And this is presented by members of the second Trump administration, particularly like Stephen Miller, for example, special White House advisor, as the eternal laws of the international system, that the international system is a jungle and that the United States need to engage in the pursuit of power, that the United States needs to pursue ruthlessly its own advantage. And we have seen manifestations of this year. The Venezuela raid, where Maduro was taken into custody through a daring commander raid by the United States. Very much an affirmation and a manifestation of what the national security strategy of 2025 called the reinvocation of the Monroe Doctrine, that this strategy is about asserting dominance of the United States in the Western Hemisphere. And the transatlantic crisis over Greenland, very much the same thing, right? Greenland is essentially being incorporated into America's regional sphere of influence, into this vision of a Monroe Doctrine, right? The sort of 21st century articulation of the Monroe Doctrine. This is very much the antithesis to liberal internationalism, the idea that the international system is based on common norms and values, territorial integrity, for example, that small and medium states have just as many rights to exist, to have their territory like the great powers. And the Trump administration, especially the second Trump administration, they really formulate a very different strategic vision from pretty much all of its predecessors. Am I coming to the end of my time, or
it's just a nudge for you to wrap up? And I've got a couple of quick follow-up questions.
So I'm just gonna leave it here.
Okay. I just wanted to so the way that Susan outlined and you have outlined this, the way we're seeing the US from Europe, this thing, how can this be done to allies and that sort of thing? That is not the way it's being seen from Washington. In Washington, it seems there is very deep thinking about the long-term direction of America. Is that correct?
I think, but there is also a great deal of inconsistency, right? When your entire grand strategy is about regional dominance in the Western Hemisphere, then why do you launch a war against Iran, where the rationales of the war basically change every week, from regime change to combating Iran's nuclear program to then taking out their ballistic missiles?
Yeah, well, sorry, can I just, is that, but what I got from you, and I might be wrong, is that even when Trump is gone, and even if a Democratic administration is in office, we are not going back to how we were before.
Yes, absolutely. I think the erosion of trust, particularly between Europe and the United States, this is not something that is easily repaired.
And which of Susan's categories that she so outlined about the American first, the prioritizers, the restrainers, which of those do you think is predominant now in Washington?
I think it's very difficult to say because so much rests on the very mercurial personality of Trump, right? And you have all of these media reports that basically Trump listens to whoever spoke to him last. So I think it is very difficult to identify a very coherent and consistent sort of dominant strain.
And do you agree with Susan broadly there?
I agree that America First has these sort of iterations between a more neo-isolationist wing and the other one where it's more about redistributing and reorienting, especially from Europe to the Asia Pacific.
I'd just like to ask you a question from one of our audience and bring Susan back very briefly for it. Some Ritesh S. Nigam, because we did touch on it. How is the Trump administration balancing the America First doctrine with the need to maintain supply chain security in critical tech? Georg, what's your view on that? How do they balance it? Is that the Colby prioritization?
Well, you see some of this in the repeated trade war offensives, right? Vis-a-vis China and sort of like, trying to limit the export by semiconductors. But then this is often partially being undone again by making a deal with China. So I think you have a lot of these, the rhetoric in these documents is much more coherent and consistent with what actually happens on the policy level, I would say.
Susan, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Sharon.
Oh, Sharon, sorry, Sharon.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Yes, I would agree with that. And it is something, as Georg mentioned, inconsistencies, I do agree with that as well. That stated goal in one area is not supported by actions or even stated goals in another area. So to the question, critical supply chains will require cooperating with allies and partners in order to build that up. And China has spent nearly 3 decades of very focused and purposeful foreign policy and economic policy, building up their control of critical mineral supply chains, the mines, the transportation out of the mines, the processing. This has been a big and very, I would argue, successful endeavor. For us to replace that, we are going to have to do something similar and work with other countries. And we do have allies and partners that can be very useful in this regard, whether it's Australia or Canada, European allies. I mean, there are deposits that can be developed, but it requires coordinated work over many years.
Sorry, because I have to move on, but the key point is that this question itself falls into the Colby category, doesn't it, of prioritizing what you need and sorting it out.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes, definitely identifying what are the most important things that we must pursue right now and putting resources into that while setting aside, for example, human rights.
Yeah.
And so that may be something that goes by the wayside in terms of an emphasis on workers' rights and conditions in these areas.
Critical minerals versus human rights. Okay, so both of you, thank you very much for that. We are now going to Dr. Dafydd Townley, who teaches international security at the University of Portsmouth, and he's the academic program lead at RAF Halton, which is one of Britain's extensive military training centres, and also the chair of the American Politics Group, which studies and debates the government and the politics of the United States. So outline for us, Dafydd Townley, what the new global security paradigm will look like.
Good afternoon. Well, I would argue that it's actually not new. I think that we've actually been in a transformative period of time of American foreign policy for arguably the last 3 or even 4 presidential terms in office, certainly since Barack Obama's pivot to the Southeast Asia, the Indo-Pacific region, and the prioritizing of that has been continued to a certain extent. And I certainly agree with some of what Georg said about, that there are continuations within both Trump's first term and Trump's second term with the previous administration. I would also argue that potentially that what we're seeing at the moment is not permanent. You've already mentioned, for example, that if the 2028 election brings in a Democratic administration, that we might see some sort of reversion. And that's certainly the message that the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Gavin Newsom were passing at the Munich Security Conference earlier this year. Their emphasis was that Donald Trump is only there until 2028. And certainly we might think that the elections in November might bring a more obstructive and a more interventional Congress that may well seek to impose its own foreign policy on the United States. Certainly, something similar to that during the last half of Trump's first term in office. I would suggest that we were asking these questions today because we haven't really been able to, or I would say that the vast majority of American scholars would argue that defense ministers and policymakers around the globe, especially in Europe, haven't really been able to predict what Donald Trump was going to do with any such accuracy. And I think that that's partly because we have looked at his first administration as being a blueprint for his second administration, as many presidencies are. Of course, this is the first non-consecutive presidency for over a century, and as a result, it's something that is relatively novel in that respect. And Trump's foreign policy, certainly in his second term, has taken certainly his European counterparts by surprise. And I think that has been a major error on their part, and it shouldn't have taken them as a surprise. What we have found is that this administration, or so we say, the Trump team, the inner circle, has certainly learned from its mistakes and its failure to take advantage of its opportunities during its first term in office, and has since come across with a strategy, an internal strategy that is driven by Project 2025, that is essentially about consolidating power within the White House. And as a result, he has certainly replaced a great deal of what has been called the so-called adults in the room, those that have been, essentially called for continuity of some sorts of the previous administration in 2017, with the Obama administration. Those have long disappeared, and we now have some loyalists in place who are more inclined to do what Trump wants to do rather than what Trump should do. Of course, what Trump should do is what we want him to do, not necessarily what he wants to do. He's also been able to, certainly in these last 18 months, operate mostly without much of a congressional pushback. Certainly around some of the funding, he's had some issues, but a great deal of what he's managed to push through has been what he's asked for, although certainly when we look domestically, his Save America bill is currently stalled, and that's the big focus of what's going on at the moment. And of course, unlike in his first term, in his second term, he's not seeking re-election. And so therefore he has little concern about doing things that are ultimately popular with the American public when it comes to foreign policy, although one might argue that that Clinton's mantra that it's the economy stupid still rings true when it comes to election time. So I think that there's also, what Sharon was mentioning about the compelling or at least competing voices within the White House is also an indication of why we can't necessarily take Project 2025 as a rigid concept. We know certainly through Trump's use of tariffs, he stepped away from some of the guidelines in that. But a great deal of his foreign policy is, in terms of his security policy, has been pretty much word for word, traced back to Project 2025. We've already mentioned the National Security Strategy, which came out in, I think it was November, which to a certain extent justified what had gone on over the previous 10 months in office, but it was no surprise if you'd looked at what Project 2025 spoke about in terms of compelling allies to shoulder more of the burden. And so I think for European security, and I certainly, we can extend this as well, I suppose, to allies in Japan and the Republic of Korea, there is a greater emphasis on them to pull the weight. Now, I work with the Royal Air Force, and we speak about a great deal about defense spending. And essentially, I would argue that there are a great deal of armed service personnel in Europe who are, applauding Trump for forcing nations to commit to greater defense spending. And that's something that has been, Sharon mentioned it as well, that this is not anything new. We can go back to Eisenhower in the 50s, urging his NATO allies to commit more towards their own defense spending. And even Barack Obama back in 2014 in Poland said that, the United States is not going to be there forever, and that European nations need to commit more to that. So I would say that whilst we are seeing a lack of continuity with previous administrations, I think that is a pattern that we need to get used to outside the Americas, or even inside the Americas. We've not had, since 2012, we've not had an incumbent president get re-elected. And so we're seeing a continuous change of administrations that coming that will change policy. And if we see this reactionary politics in the United States that is ultimately polarized, this is a cycle that we've got to get used to. And so I see, while there is a great deal in terms of emphasis on European leaders to commit more to their defense spending, this cannot go away in 2028, because we may well be in the same position in 2032 at the election after that. So I think I'll leave that there, and I'm happy to sort of defend that position.
That's fine. David, thank you very much. Can I give you a question from the audience? Tracy Den Croghan, exactly what you were talking about. Can European strategic autonomy materialize fast enough to offset a diminished US defense umbrella? Yes or no?
The answer is yes and no. The answer is yes, it can do if they all commit. The problem is, I think, is that, for example, the last government in this, the last prime minister had a very strict set of spending rules in which his government operated, and it will take the current prime minister or the prime minister after to change those spending rules. We do know that European banks, or at least under the European Union, has allowed or changed their spending rules to allow nations to borrow a great deal more, to invest more in defense. But it's not just spending more on ordnance.
Could I rephrase the question then?
Yeah.
Will it materialize fast enough? Yes or no?
I think yes. And I simply think yes, because it has to. There is a very significant threat, both in terms of a conventional military threat, but also what we would call hybrid threats that NATO and its European partners face. And unfortunately, the United States is not the reliant partner that it once was. That's not to say it cannot be again. It's just to say at the moment it isn't.
Let's leave it with that. So thank you very much for that. We are now going for a very short break and then back to our final panelists. Welcome back. And now to our final panelist, Dr. Sergey Smolnikov, the author of US Foreign Policy and Presidential Leadership in an Age of Strategic Uncertainty, published this year, and earlier, Great Power, Conduct and Credibility in World Politics. He's with York University in Toronto and has worked with a raft of academic institutions in North America, Europe and Asia. Perfect to round off our debate. So Sergey Smolnikov, where are we heading? Have your fellow panelists got it right?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to begin with a somewhat conceptual perspective that I would like you to be aware of. As many international relations experts agree, the world has entered systemic transition. And the causes are structural, stemming from shifts in the global distribution of power, yet the role of human agency is mostly understated. And as I argue in my recent new book on US foreign policy, the presidency becomes a structural force during periods of systemic inflection. So Trump's presidency is a textbook case. Like every US president, Trump operates under domestic and external pressures. These are defined by polarization and continuous diminution of US relative power. I define 3 stages in great power lifespans. Throughout the power cycle, policymakers need to align foreign and security policy with fluctuations in their relative power. These policies differ in their maximization principles. The upstream phase is defined by power maximization. This is expansionary behavior, pursuit of influence, capability accumulation, culminating in the projection of strength. The downstream phase combines the second and the third stages. The first half of the downstream phase is aligned with security maximization. It is defined by defensive posture, alliance buildup, and risk containment. And the third stage emerges in its second half. It is the stage when power holders focus on maximizing the credibility of their nation's images of power and influence. At this stage, leaders signal their prowess and resolve to their peers. Demonstrations of force against inconsequential actors become the instruments of signaling power credibility. The United States is at the third stage of its power cycle. And this lenses define Trump's foreign policy in a specific way. It is a set of actions that seek to retain America's image of primacy. At the same time, his personality traits leave their imprint on the instruments used. This explains the chain of seemingly chaotic actions in his second-term policy. These actions range from high tariffs on imports from trade partners, including allies, to the Hollywood blockbuster-like capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, the energy blockade of Cuba, calls to annex Canada and Greenland, and the sporadic war against Iran. All these are performative acts aimed at shaping public opinion. And their goal is to project an image of infinite strength and influence. At home, the audience is Trump's Republican supporters and undetermined voters. Abroad, it is the rulers of rivaling states like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Trump's personal qualities and professional background shaped his worldview. He views international relations as an arena of business transactions and rental-style primacy. In this view, America's role in upholding the rule-based world order failed to bring dividends. A hegemon providing public goods gets no monetary revenue. Therefore, retaining hegemonic functions makes no sense for the United States. At the same time, the administration has a central foreign policy focus. That focus is maintaining American supremacy over its main rival, China. The administration views other countries through the prism of isolating China. It has conditioned their economic cooperation with the US on one thing. They must curtail business partnerships with China. An emerging world order is therefore likely to be bipolar. The US and China would be the centers of individual nations' gravity. The previous bipolar system was defined by integration within opposing blocs. Unlike that, the new system is likely to be marked by incoherence. This incoherence would occur within the America and China-centered networks. This pattern is attributable to two factors. One is Washington's opposition to multilateral entanglements. The other is Beijing's dependency on its non-aligned strategy. A consequence of Trump's policy is thus a redesigning of the international system. It moves away from traditional alliances toward a patchwork structure. In this structure, countries' policies are defined not by regional affiliation. Instead, they are defined by their leaning toward the United States or Chinese centers of gravity. This trend will be sustained by Washington and Beijing wedge strategies. These strategies aim at preventing or breaking rival coalitions. In the upcoming years, I believe these trends will likely determine the emerging global security paradigm.
Sergey, thank you very much for that. Beautifully argued, if I might say. Can I put to you and then open up this same question to the rest of the panel? It comes from Peter Cornish. It's in a real lived-in experience of today. Would a more hands-off American approach stabilize the Middle East region, or would it create a vacuum filled by new power alignments?
Well, thank you for this question. As I tried to explain in my short introduction, the United States is at a very specific time in its lifespan. It is at the stage of power decline when it has to present its image of power as still being reliable, credible, strong, resolute. And this dictates, under the conditions or against the background of the diminution of American capabilities, this dictates a certain type of foreign and security policy, which is of performative action, performative nature. So what we saw on the example of the Middle East, this continuous war against Iran, was the desire to demonstrate to the international community and, of course, to the major audiences abroad, like the Iranian, Chinese, North Korean, Russian, that America is still there.
Okay.
But the point is that America, while being there, does not have enough capabilities to accomplish its strategitic objectives in the region. And this is a special question, but we can discuss it later on.
It's a great question. Can I ask that same question to the rest of the panel? Because I think, as Sergey said, it widens the whole debate. Sharon, Middle East region, if America pulled out, would it create a vacuum?
Yes, I believe it would. With the current dynamic in today's world and power balances, the US pulling out of any region does create a vacuum, and then that vacuum will be filled in some way. And so I would say what we're seeing right now in Europe actually is going in the right direction. So the US is pulled back on direct support for Ukraine and is talking very forcefully to NATO allies about pulling back. Europeans are stepping forward. They are working towards filling that vacuum, both on European defense and security, but also supporting Ukraine. In the Middle East, it would get very tricky. I mean, Russia has a very long and very effective diplomatic relationship with Middle Eastern countries and a presence there, an interest there that's quite historical. Israel, of course, has long relied on American support, and without that would be vulnerable. It would destabilize the region. That doesn't mean that the United States cannot move in a different direction or do other things, but I do think that the question of a vacuum and who would fill it and how is very real.
Yeah, that's Georg Loefflmann, what's your view on this issue of America pulling out of places?
I'm not even sure that the United States is still fully in the Middle East to a certain extent, right? The back and forth over, the Iran war, what are the strategic objectives, the inability of the United States to effectively defend its Gulf allies, the fact that they've been sort of caught flat-footed with the Iranian drone threat has undermined, I think, America's position in the Middle East. And I think this will already be filled by other actors within the region and also extra-regional actors. And I don't really see that the United States will make a forceful return in the Middle East either, as the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific looms ever larger.
Oh, thank you. That's very interesting. Dafydd Townley, your view?
Well, I have to agree with what everybody said before, to be quite honest. There's not a lot I can add to that, but I would say that, this is a strategic imperative for Project 2025, is that it does reduce its footprint in the Middle East. The current situation that it faces now is of the Trump administration's own doing. The same sort of situation, from what we're led to believe, was offered to the Obama administration and various other administrations that came before it, who refused to do anything that the Trump administration has done, simply because they were aware that the chaos that it's currently causing and the potential chaos that it could happen as it withdraws from the region even further. So yes, I think it's sort of as Georg said, I think it's sort of half in, half out of the Middle East, and doesn't know which side of the step it wants to be.
Interesting, that stage of decline that Sergey was talking about. It is time to bring in the chair of Democracy Forum, Barry Gardner, MP, who has been keeping a vigil on our conversations, and I'm sure on Trump paradigms and global security has views of his own. Barry, over to you.
Hubert, thank you so much.
Sharon, I do apologize.
Look, normally, Humphrey, when you appear on the screen, I'm often thinking, oh, thank God, this one said all that they needed to say, and I'm glad that you're intervening. I have to say, I really resented you appearing on the screen to call time on this lot.
Me too.
It was a really fascinating discussion, and everyone so clearly structured in what they said. Let's start, I think, with what our chair, Lord Bruce, said. Talked about the new White House security strategy, the need to grapple with insecurity, and how to secure American supremacy, and he used that quote, "I decide," about transactional nationalism. Hard to think of a case where the leader of an alliance has thrown away its allies so lightly. Now, Sharon came in and gave us a really fascinating, I thought, insider's view, and thank you for that, Sharon. Just taking us through the different strands of the administration, which, as president, he is having to discriminate between and adjudicate. She talked about the prioritizers. We talked quite extensively about Kolbe. This sense of asserting power without constraint, but having clear priorities, and those priorities focusing inevitably on China. We obviously came to the reasons for that slightly later, talking about the timelines as she did with critical minerals, the processing and production dominated by China, but absolutely essential now in terms of the economic growth that the US is looking for. She talked about the restrainers, the J.D. Vance strand within the government. Let's not run the world. Let's assert our leadership in more strategic, limited ways. And talked about the America First, the Mar-a-Lago Accords, the use of tariffs to secure dominance and indeed the defense security. So using economic and defense areas to secure that economic advantage, that is something that I think we recognize. It's in this transactional mode of behavior that the administration has. I think she said at the beginning it wasn't a shift to isolationism, but a refusal to be bound, demanding to be the unconstrained actor. And I have to say that my philosophical training took me back to Gaiji's ring and that unconstrained ability. When you are the invisible actor, you can do what you like. Not that the US is in any way invisible, but the paradigm is in effect the same. You have the power to do whatever you wish in a way that is unconstrained. And I just wonder how any leader or any government, and by that I mean all the powers of government in the US, in Congress as well as in the presidency, can consider that they can actually maintain that as a position in a world of interdependence. So that's a question I would leave lying on the table and would love to know Sharon's thoughts on that. Dr. Georg Loefflmann, American hegemony is maintaining liberal democracy, America exceptionalism, the USA as the indispensable state. He talked about the historic, the context in which we've seen Trump's second presidency. But he said, the wars went wrong. There was retrenchment, this sense that the US needed to be more concerned about fixing the streets of Chicago before fixing the streets of Kabul, and said that Obama wanted to modify and make exceptionalism sustainable, but Trump has rejected it and says, America first, America my only concern, and really not worried about what happens to anybody else. And he gave us the other trilogy that we had today: nationalism, populism, and realism. And for me, the phrase that struck me most, I think, perhaps out of today, was Trump doesn't just want to win, he wants others to lose. Many of our US participants will know Daniel Ellsberg. I had a long association with his family. And his grandson once asked his mother, Mom, do dogs go to heaven? And she comforted him. He was only about 7 or 8 years old. And she comforted him. She brought him in because they had a little dog. And she said, of course, darling, dogs go to heaven. Don't worry. And he looked at her and he said, yeah, Mom, but what I really want to know is there a hell for dogs? And that true story has always struck me in a way that what Dr. Loefflmann said about Trump doesn't just want to win, he wants the others to lose, strikes me. Populism, he said, the free trade has weakened the US and let down its citizens. Realism is about economic and military power and this reinvocation of the Monroe Doctrine and asserting the US dominant sphere over its sphere of influence. So on a new paradigm, what is a paradigm? It's a model. It's a typical example. It's a pattern for global security. I think anybody looking at the roller coaster that global security has been on, including the MAGA base themselves looking at it, would, and indeed it was pointed out, they say, but you didn't promise us this. And the world has said, well, this is certainly not what we expected. So I'm not sure that we can see in it a paradigm. Moving on to Dafydd Townley, not now. He said, sorry, not new, not permanent. He sees a nirvana in the future where AOC and Gavin Newsom can come to the rescue maybe after the midterms. And he says, the fact that people didn't predict Trump was an error of the US's allies. I think that may well be right. We weren't sufficiently respectful of the real concerns that the MAGA base had and of the way in which they were gaining realization that they were becoming live within the formulation of Trump's second-term policy. And I think, certainly in the UK and liberal democracies in general, we probably looked at them with a rather snooty, superior air and thought, we can dismiss this. And that's why I think there was a complete lack of preparation for Trump too. But he points out that the MAGA base learned from their failures. And that's why there's been no pushback except now in the Save America bill. And urging NATO allies to spend more goes back to Eisenhower, he said. Absolutely right. Can Europe come fast enough to compensate for US withdrawal? He said yes, because it has to. I wonder what we're looking at as the external driver here. There is a huge amount of rhetoric talking about the danger posed by Russia to Western Europe. It is absolutely at the top of most of certainly France, Germany, UK's political agenda and their budgetary considerations. But when you consider that we're looking at a power which has gained 19 miles, maybe 21, in the past 5 years, the idea that it is going to be able to roll into, as sometimes is expressed, into Western Europe, into Poland and beyond, I think we need to look more carefully at. Now, Sergey Smolnikov gave what he rightly called a conceptual perspective. And again, he gave us this other trilogy here: the upstream, the power maximization, and then the downstream, where security maximizes its alliances and containment, and then the signalization, the final destructive downstream side, the signaling of power, the presentation of power, the performative action, demonstrating strength, but actually sometimes in the process of trying to demonstrate strength, showing weakness. And he cited Venezuela, Cuban blockade, Greenland and Iran. And he said that when the hegemon doesn't generate revenue, it is dispensable. US isolating China and therefore demanding its allies don't do business with China, this wedge strategy. My question, I suppose, to him and to others in the panel would be, in this wedge strategy, what is the significance of the decision that India eventually makes about the new G2? Which way does it jump? How does it lean? How does it play a balancing role? I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Barry. I think you've just given us the next topic for a future debate there, of where India is facing. Before we leave, I want to go back to the panel. The title of our debate, the US under Trump, a new global security paradigm. We've already heard that it might not be so new, but give us your headline thought, your New York Times, Fox News top line. Sharon Hudson-Dean.
I'll leave everyone with the thought that this is not going to slow down. As many of my fellow panelists have noted, a lot of what President Trump does is performative, it's provocative rhetoric, and it's moving out before the details are worked out. I expect that will continue. The president and the administration is operating off of the very focused perception of having limited time to make changes and get things done and reorient the policy, and they are doing that as fast as possible, which was one of the major strategy goals for Project 2025. And I would also highlight the America First Policy Institute, which is like Project 2025, and which also they'd like to take credit for having authored about nearly 200 of the executive orders so far. Moving fast, getting it out there, changing and consolidating executive power. It is not going to stop.
Not slowing down, whatever this new paradigm is, not slowing down. Georg Loefflmann, your view, your headline thought.
I would say that under the second Trump presidency, America has morphed from being a guarantor of European security to actually challenging European security.
Challenging, not slowing down, and challenging European security. Dafydd Townley?
My headline would be the chaos isn't over and won't be for a while, and that we will be lacking consistency for a number of years.
You're not slowing down, lacking consistency. Sergey, Smolnikov, your final thought.
I think that the major question for the next several months will be at least the impact of Trump's foreign policy on the domestic situation in the United States.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you all for that. And thank you all at the Democracy Forum for making this really important debate happen. Like Barry said, we wanted it to go on for longer. Our next Democracy Forum debate is August 11th, Redefining Red Lines, Iran's Evolving Nuclear Calculus. That'll be fascinating. Until then, from all of us at the Democracy Forum, stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.